Welcome, everybody. My name is Erica Wall, and I am the director of the Berkshire Cultural Resource Center here at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. I want to take a moment to welcome all of you to our discussion tonight. We're so glad to see so many people who are interested in participating in our conversation. And I know that we have quite a few people that have signed up for tonight's event, which is really exciting. So I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction as we wait for folks to make it into the Zoom room, I guess they call it. So I think I will start out with, to the best of my ability, we've got a lot of wonderful people that have participated and worked to put all of this together. And you'll have an opportunity to meet and hear from them as we're going to break out into smaller groups so we can really start to delve into working towards anti-racism. And I'll start off by saying that will not be completed within the 90 minutes that we have here together. So let's not set our expectations too high, but let's definitely start to do the work. I'm going to take a moment to introduce Christopher McDonald Dennis, who is MCLA's Chief Diversity Officer. And he is actually going to start us off and introduce our program tonight. And Christopher will talk for about 25, 30 minutes and just kind of set us up. And then we will go into breakout groups, which will last about another 25, 30 minutes. We'll come back together. And within those groups, you'll have a pair or at least one person that will facilitate and ask a few questions to generate some discussion and responses. When we come back, we'll have each group share something that they had discussed, and then we will wrap it up and talk about where we go from here. I really want to reiterate again that all of the folks that came together who are part of the North Adams Artists Coalition and put this together, I really want to thank all of them, and I want to just tell you how much work it went into coming up with all of this, putting in the discussions. And so we really want to make sure that we keep that discussion going through the work that we start here. So I want to tell you personally how much I appreciate you participating, but also that we appreciate your courage in participating in the discussion, because that is not an easy thing and it should not be overlooked. And that you are in a place that we've created here at BCRC, which is committed to creating a safe space for dialogue around race. We do that specifically through art, but we want everyone to feel comfortable with sharing to the extent that they can. And again, that's the least that we could do because you've made the commitment and are participating. So I also want to say that as we won't be able to finish all of this in 90 minutes, I think it's highly likely that we won't just wrap up at our 6:30 mark. This will be recorded and put online at our BCRC YouTube page. So should you have to leave or we don't finish the discussion, please don't think that you will miss out. It will be recorded and we will provide follow-up to everyone that is signed up for this particular program so that we can continue to do the work, and then you'll know what is going to happen next. So I think at this point, we have quite a few folks on, and maybe we'll wait a couple more minutes, but I am going to hand it over to Christopher to maybe add a little bit more. And if there are any questions that anyone has before we get started, I definitely ask you to ask those questions. And what I will ask is that we show respect in terms of sharing our ideas with everyone. Part of that is throughout this, we really ask that everyone stay on camera and keep themselves muted until it is time for you to speak. But in order for us to really create that community that we're hoping to achieve here, we ask that you put yourself on camera. Okay, so I'm going to hand it off to Christopher McDonald Dennis.
Thank you, Erica. You should know I actually go by Chris, but Erica has called me Christopher since she first met me, and I allow her with that. So it's actually one of the things I find special about our relationship that she just started calling me Christopher. And I was like, okay, I'm Christopher. But actually, I generally do go by Chris. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming. This is a really interesting moment that we're having this conversation. If people know about the last 24 hours, that in case people don't know, we had a city councilor in North Adams called Black Lives Matter, a terrorist organization. He also said some deeply problematic things about COVID-19, which reminds me that those often go together. But when I woke up this morning and I saw the news, I thought, our need to do this work just ratcheted it up. This isn't just something that happens elsewhere. My frustration is that that person is also on the school committee, and there are Black children in the school system. So I am concerned about that, deeply concerned. So at the end, I'll talk about some things that I've been hearing during the day, what's going to happen, so that when we talk about doing action, and I appreciate that Erica is saying we are not going to fix 400 years of institutional racism in an hour and a half. Better people have tried than me, so we are not going to be able to do this. This is a beginning conversation. Because for lots of us, talking about race is difficult. Talking about racism is difficult. And that is for all people. That is for white people and people of color. For white folks, often there is this idea that I don't want to get it wrong, I don't want to offend someone, I don't want to hurt someone. For people of color, it's often, I can't go there. I will be misunderstood. They're not going to get it anyway. Or I don't want to ruin this relationship with this person that I care about. So I would like to tell you a little bit about my story and how I come to this conversation around race and racism. I've lived here in North Adams for 2.5 years, but I'm originally from Boston. And my dad is Irish, my father is Irish, and my mother is Puerto Rican. I was born in 1969, and those of you who are old enough to remember, that was kind of like oil and vinegar going together. Or is it oil and water? That analogy always escapes me. So, you know, the one where they don't mix together. We actually moved out of the city proper and moved to East Boston, and moved to Revere when I was 5 because the busing crisis, which really it wasn't a busing crisis, let's be honest. It was people who were actively against desegregation. Like we say, as Julian Bond said when he was speaking in Boston during that time, he said, it's not the bus, it's us. Because people have been bused for many, many reasons, for decades. And my parents didn't know where I would be put. And my father, being Irish and originally being from South Boston, said, I will, excuse my language, I will fucking kill someone if they touch my little boy. And my mother, being very smart, said, I don't want you to go to jail, so let's move somewhere else. So I grew up in Revere. One of the questions we'll be getting at and we'll be talking about is our first memory of race. And for me, it was when I was 5 years old, because it dawned on me that my parents were being treated very differently. When we would go into different offices like the police or the welfare office or something like that, because I was also raised working class. I noticed that my dad was treated very differently than my mother, and that my father also, I don't know that I knew there was something different. I now understood that my father walked through the world with an ease that my mother's family never, ever would. So I became really cognizant of race. I thought a lot about it because of how I looked. And growing up in Revere, people just assumed I was Italian. People thought, you know, or I was Jewish or I was Portuguese or something. And it wasn't until I moved to the Midwest that people actually saw who I was. But what was different for me than for many of my white brothers, sisters, and siblings is that I was taught to think about my skin color all the time. Because my mother would always talk about, you are lucky that you have that. You will enter spaces that I never can. I mean, she said it in a different way, but always know this doesn't make you better. It's just access. And that's what whiteness is about access to a safe life. But unfortunately, how the system of whiteness often works is that white people get confused to that's who they are. And that's who they walk around the world like, you know, we see the, whatever you think of the term Karen, we see with these very entitled white people, you know, like, I get to tell you how to live your life, even though mind your own damn business, but like people really are not minding their business. So I think that, so I tell you this to say I have a really unique perspective on race. White people are often very comfortable telling me certain things around what they think about Black, Indigenous, and people of color until they find out who my family is. And then they're like, I meant, and I'm like, no, you were quite clear what you meant. So for me, there's this kind of insider outsider perspective. And I often joke that I'm a bridge often to people. So I think that's one of the reasons that as Erica and the collective that was working on this appreciated that kind of perspective. And first of all, I just want to thank the collective. The people that you'll get to know, the facilitators, are amazing folks who are just saying, we need to do this work. I'm scared. One of the things that I learned and that I hope that you model, that you learn from these people, they are doing this despite some of them, and I won't say who it is, who are scared to death to do this. And they're pushing through their fear to do it. To me, that's courage. Courage isn't when something's easy to you. I actually don't think, for me, talking about race is courageous. For me, I do it all the time. I do it every day. For those of you who these are beginning conversations, who are scared, whose voices are going to shake, for me, those are the people that I'm going to say, thank you, and there's courage. Why is this so important to talk, and what can we do? That's, I think, another thing that was so important. Since I moved here in two and a half years ago, so to tell you, I am a gay man, and my husband is a gay Black man. So we are two men of color who have moved to the Northern Berkshires and actually really love it. You know, people are always kind of shocked, like, you love it? Because, you know, but it's so white. I'm like, yeah, it is. I would actually argue that it's not as white as people think. I remember once saying to Mayor Bernard, I said, I think that we are more racially diverse than you even realize. And he said, huh. And I think it's because I'm looking for it. I've joked with Erica, you know, that when, you know, I see a person of color, I text my husband. I was like, I saw someone on the street, and I wanted to follow them and be like, hey, are you staying? Please don't say that you're just coming in and going, or you're just a Williams student. Nothing against Williams students, but, you know, they're going to leave. So, but I think that what often happens is that people don't realize what often happens on these streets. So I'd like to give two examples. One that actually just happened the other day, and one actually that happened in an arts organization. I will not say the name of the organization because I don't want to, some of you may have heard of it, but the first thing was my husband was taking a walk in in our neighborhood. We live on Taft Street, and what do they call us, the fashionable West End now? And so I just want to do a content warning that I am going to be saying some racist things. And unfortunately, just to kind of tell you, this is what people are hearing. I will never say the N word, just so you know. Like, don't think, oh, is that what he's going to say? It's actually anti-Asian racism. So he's walking and he sees this white woman trying to chase a cat. And she said, get in this house because there's an Oriental restaurant down the street. I'll give you to the Chinese. My husband comes home and he's like, I don't want to see this, but like that is often, and he didn't say something because again, we don't know who these people are. And one of the challenges, we never expect it. We never expect it. So the second was in a museum. So my husband is the director of TRIO Student Support Services at Berkshire Community College. And he was doing a museum visit with a Black student and a Puerto Rican student. And they were walking and an older white security guard was following the students. And she said, are you gonna follow me the whole way? And he said, oh no, someone else will look at you when you get in. Again, who feels like they belong, who is being told pretty evidently that they do not belong. So I think that, so I say that to say that racism exists here. Racism exists here in North Adams. Lots of folks don't necessarily know how to deal with it. And that's one of the things that as I was working with the collective coming up with this is often we don't know what to say. We're like, oh, people like, I don't want to say the wrong thing and or but it is critical that we say something. It is critical that white people say something. It's critical that Black, Indigenous, and people of color say something too. Speak up back. So that also may mean that some of us may be uncomfortable when someone says, can I tell you that really hurt? And being able to listen and to say, I'm getting a gift that this person actually trusted me enough. Sometimes it's not a gift we always want. It's like, oh, I don't want to know. But this is really how I'm looking at Anna because we had a very great conversation about being a compass versus an ally. And I said, it doesn't matter. Language doesn't matter. Just do the work. But Anna, I now realize that actually it is accomplice and not ally, because ally assumes, and unfortunately it's become this, that it's not action oriented. So that's where the language matters. It's about action. We have to do something. So whether it's accomplice, but if you call yourself an ally and ally means doing something, hey, all I know and all we know as the collective that brought us all together is that we have to do something, even if our voice is shaky, even if we're like, I don't want to do this. Because you know what, folks, we're going to be doing it in the next weeks. With a city councilor that said those things, we will be stepping up and we will be speaking out. And those of you who are leaders in our community, people will be looking to you saying, what are we going to do? How do we handle this? How do we, I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble, but how, Erica knows, I'll say it. How do we get this person out of office? How do we say that there are standards will not allow? So I just think that that's really critical. Again, I did not think that it was going to be this. I thought we were going to have more kind of like this, this theoretical conversation, about things. And now the rubber has hit the road, as we say. Are there any questions that people have that if you want to write in the chat? That's one of the things that often when I do Zoom meetings and stuff, if people have any have any questions, but I would love to open, like, if anyone has any questions about this, or Erica, if you thought of anything as I was speaking that you want me to elaborate on.
You know, I think that it's a good point that you make, that often when we have these conversations, we use these examples or look at it theoretically, but it is quite real. And though you might not recognize it at the moment, you may be in a situation in which you can address something or you can speak up. And I feel like this is our opportunity to, before we start to do this work, when we discussed this with Christopher and the Artist Impact Coalition members, we did talk about the understanding that this requires individual work. We, at the core, are individuals who desire and seek a way toward anti-racism. That's a choice. You're self-selected. It was not imposed upon you, but that requires a commitment that you really need to assess whether or not you're able to make on a consistent basis. And what we found was, how do we do that work for ourselves as both people of color and those that are not? And then how do we model that behavior, but also stay vigilant and consistent with that? And so I think those examples that Christopher used are what we're asking each of us to go back either a long time ago and think about your first experience with that, or whether it's been recent, so that we can do some self-interrogation and see where we are as individuals, because we can't do anything unless we're comfortable with ourselves and what we're going to do, so that we feel empowered and strong enough to go forward and do that work. So I think those are the thoughts that came to mind, and I think one of the things we wanted to do too here was that at moments, and I've had them myself, where I felt like I was uncomfortable, which I'm uncomfortable a lot, but didn't feel strong enough to say something. It's because of that sense of being alone, or not having the support, or thinking that someone else isn't going to support you in speaking up or disrupting order. And I think that we want to see, if you can see all these faces on here, these are all people that feel at least moved enough to come and have this conversation, so we are not by ourselves. And that it is in strength that we move forward, but sometimes we have to identify ourselves and come together so that we can see in mass who we are, and we can find those sorts of opportunities and take away. What I hope too tonight is that we do, and I'm sure Christopher will, and within your groups, you'll come away with some idea of just even a few actions you can take to move us forward, because it is going to be exceptionally small and incremental steps that we take, but that still does move us forward. And that you do not feel, let me repeat, that you do not feel that you cannot do anything. Everyone has a role to play, and everyone can do something. It should not feel overwhelming or impossible. That, I think, is what we want people to come away with. And as we work in the arts, we see different situations and opportunities for change, and this is just one of our ways to work toward that. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I hope other people have maybe some other things to share, or again, clarify any questions before we go in the breakout groups that we share those now. And feel free to either raise your hand physically or go into chat, or you can digitally raise your hand, and either Veronica, I, or Brianna can unmute you and help you out.
I think one of the things that Erica mentioned that I think is so important, and that I told the collective, is that especially for those of you who were raised white, nice white people don't talk about race. There is no way. White people are often not taught how to be race conscious. the only white people who we see who talk about race, the KKK and things like that. And what is being required now is to be race conscious and to be able to talk about race. And that's, for some of you, are like, you're now asking me, I got the rules a long time ago. So that's what we want to do, is to work this muscle that you may not be comfortable. But I also want us to also remember that for people of color, we also have a muscle that we need to, is to be honest with our white friends, our white colleagues, you know, not just to roll our eyes. Because I will be honest, and those of you who identify as women probably know this, that when a man does something that's sexist, women not say anything, but then there's the meeting after the meeting, where you're like, can you believe he said that? I can't believe that. Well, people of color do that too. Or there will be that look. I know that some of you who are of color, I know I've given Erica that look sometimes, like that. That person just said what they said. And we have to be more honest. We have to trust, but know that, so we both have to be vulnerable, because you have to be vulnerable to be like, I don't know everything, but I'm going to say it. And we have to be vulnerable to say that this person who I care about deeply is going to be able to hear me. So it's just, so I want to say that, so it's not like, oh, this one group, like white people, you need to get it together, blah, blah, blah. People have, you know, we all have work to do around this.
If I could jump in.
Oh, Molly, yes, sorry about that. Yeah.
No, it's okay. First, I want to say, Erica and Chris, thank you so much for leading this and in this introduction. Something, you know, I spend a lot of time thinking about rural spaces. And I think that it's especially important for us in a rural city to push back as often as we can against this strange idea that has come up, that racism it happens only in urban areas. Racism doesn't happen in rural areas, when I think we all know, like, if anything, it can probably be more racist here. It's just perhaps a different kind, perhaps it's still the same. But it's a racism that's not talked about, the kind of rural racism. So that's something that I push myself to always try to remember
Right.
in these moments.
Right. And there's this idea, Molly, kind of going with what you're saying, is that we don't live here. You know, that it's like, it's all white people. And it's like, you know, it's one of the things I used to get so angry after 2016. People used to keep saying, like, you know, the flyover states, the Midwest, like Midwest only meant white. And I was like, and mind you, I lived in Minnesota at the time. I was like, oh, last time I checked, Minnesota was, so, you know, and so there's a way that, you know, it's kind of this, we flatten the narrative. I think, Molly, that's what you're talking, you know, we're both saying. It's like, we flatten the narrative, that like, it's a lot more complicated. So if we want to, I mean, we're going early, but do we want to do breakout groups then?
I think that sounds good.
That sounds wonderful. So, so as Erica mentioned, in the breakout groups, you talk about your first memory of race, like when you kind of realized it, and about a time that you noticed some racial discrimination. So it's really, we hope that people really are active listeners, that people, I have a colleague who does healing work, and she always says to remember that you are amazing, awesome, and brilliant. That every person around that room is amazing, and sit there and listen delightedly to what they have to share, because for some people, this may be the first time that they're doing this type of work. So I don't know who is going to, is it Brianna?
Yeah, that's me, Chris. I have a question. So
Yes.
when would you like us to come back?
Yeah.
You know what? Oh, I think we said about a half hour, so maybe 6.
Yeah, 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And I will send like a 2-minute warning to people when
Perfect.
Perfect.
hopefully the facilitators in each group can also keep an eye on the time. And then Chris, would you like to be in a group, or do you want to hang out?
You know, actually, I am going to stay out here because I wanted to make sure that, like, if someone want to talk, especially what's kind of going on and things like that, like, I would just kind of be here to be like, hey, if people like, I have an idea or I'm kind of confused, I would be here and just, and wait delightedly.
Okay, sounds good. So I am going to press this button to open rooms, and I think you all will have to click something on your end to go into your group.
The time goes by really quickly.
I was going to say, I could tell that when it came, I was like, people don't want to stop talking about this, but
That's wonderful.
that is a wonderful problem to have. And, you know, it also shows that it's actually a lot more, I don't want to say fun, but, you know, it's a lot more enjoyable than people think. Like, you actually really get to learn a lot about yourself. So, I would love if different groups, so I did put kind of the rest that, if each group could just share one thing from your discussion, kind of, you know, something that kind of was like, oh, I didn't realize this, or you want the rest of us to know.
I'd be happy to share from our group.
Sure.
I think, you know, what during the course of our conversations, you know, I think we realized that there are some common threads to what we were all sharing, and that is that any small change that we can make in our own behavior or in helping others change their behavior is going to be a step in the right direction, and that we can no longer afford to be silent. We need to use our voices to make changes and to help other people understand where the issues are and how they can be better.
That's wonderful. I completely agree. What about other folks?
I can share from our group. We ended up kind of talking about a lot about the frustration of social media and the lack of kind of productive conversation, shall we say, that happens there, and so we were kind of talking about ways to combat that, or to create a more productive conversation.
Right.
And we had a few different things that was suggested, but if I may, I want to highlight something that Noah said at the very end that was a little bit cut off because we all came back, but he brought up this great point of, because we're in such a politicized time that we're getting news, as I think Kathy said in our group, we're getting news from such completely different places, right? Like, what is our truth, I think was the phrase that was used, that to meet someone and try to engage with them in these conversations who believe that they have all of this evidence to back up what they think and what they are saying, that it really requires kind of traveling down their path a little bit to empathize with them in order to hopefully bring them closer to an anti-racist agenda.
I love that, Molly. It reminds me that one day I was waiting for my car in the mechanic's office, and I had to spend a whole bunch of time there, and they had Fox News on, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna sit here and listen. And I thought, if this was the only place that I get my news, I literally would think that there are hordes of brown people coming and trying to take my job and my life. You know, it was such a nihilistic worldview that I was just like, I didn't ever watch it. But then part of me, there was a little empathy that I had, like, oh, if this is what you're viewing, of course you think this. Now, that doesn't mean that I still know what to do with it, you know, but it was at least for a moment I could say, okay. And it is, as I was telling a friend of mine this morning, you know, because she lives in, she's a white woman who lives in a predominantly white environment. And she's like, you know, there are these people who, you know, are just so afraid. And I said, for some people, the election of the first Black president with the realization that white people, as I joke, are going to be a minority in this country in like 5 seconds, brought out this, oh, we're losing power. We're losing power. And it brings out some manifestations of white supremacy that lots of us knew were there, but we were hoping that it was like, they're just, you know, in the, on the sides. And yeah, it is difficult, but you're right. Social media for me, actually what I've learned to do is I don't have those conversations. If it really starts getting like heated, I actually say, I need to have a conversation with you. Like I'm not going to have this conversation, because I literally lost a friend after when, because I lived in St. Paul when Philando Castile was killed. And literally she had some people on her page that were saying some racist things, and I still think that she could have handled it better, but this was my oldest friend in the world. And I was like, I don't want to lose my oldest friend in the world. So, am I wrong? I don't know. But I now realize, like, what I should have done is I should have called her and been like, you know what? I just have to, given that I live 2 miles down, I'm just hearing and I'm reading some really problematic things. I want to have a conversation with you. So, sorry about that. Other people, other groups.
I can share what we talked about. So in our group, the thing we all sort of kept circling back to was this idea of blatant racism and an underlying tone of racism that especially happens in North County. As we talked about before, we don't blatantly talk about race, but it's still, racism is exhibiting itself in many facets. And also just something that I noticed personally when discussing our first memory of race and witnessing acts of racism, the white folks in the group, the first memory was learning about races of minorities and marginalized folks. And for the people of color, it was experiencing race. And I just found it interesting that white people's memory of race is rarely about whiteness. It's rarely about their own race. It's always about a different race. And I just found that to be very interesting in listening to our conversation.
Yeah. Oh, Rebecca, that is so spot on, that white people don't have a race. And that's really where, and unfortunately in this moment, whiteness as a race, white as a race isn't really coming across that good, you know, because people are seeing kind of like this white identity politics. But yeah, that has always been a challenge for white folks to see that white folks also have a race. Other groups. I don't know how many groups there were, so if
I can share quickly from
Sure.
our group. We had 5 of us, all white folks, and our memories seem to circle around the fact that our memories of sort of first awareness of race seem to circle around having all grown up in, you know, mostly or all white neighborhoods, and then sort of traveling outside those spaces to sort of glimpse that there are spaces that are not all white, and being either surprised, confused, uncomfortable, and so we all sort of had an awareness of the, like, there was a kind of othering that had happened in our early years around, you know, we live among white people, and then there's these other folks who we don't talk about much, but they're, you know, but but they're there, and so our understandings of them are limited, and so that was kind of permeating our conversation a bit. And then around disrupting racism, or encountering and disrupting, it mostly had to do thinking mostly about family, sort of some more distant, like grandparent kind of stuff, but also some more recent ones where, language that feels, where it's not coming from a place of, malign intent as much as real just not awareness, or an internalized racism that is still filtering out and needs to be addressed and talked about, but it's very uncomfortable to do so.
Right.
I could speak for our group, who kind of circled around the kind of the reverse of what you just described, Blair. Some of us talked about coming from fairly diverse or relatively diverse places, and then early in childhood moving to somewhere that was remarkably less so, and having that same comeuppance, but in the other direction that you were just describing, like, oh wait, like, where are all the people who have any melanin at all in their skin? And thinking about here in this town and in this region, the importance, particularly in light of today's news, with that guy who's on the school committee, thinking about what value and values can be instilled in those early childhood years, which are so formative, because that's when we really figure out who we are relative to other people and relative to ourselves. And so yeah, no clear answers, but
Right.
we've got to keep working on it.
Right. There are some really good resources now for white people on how to talk about race and racism with their children. Because one of the things that's often true that I realized as I started studying this and started talking and listening to white folks' stories around race is that oftentimes it will be, say, in the supermarket, and they will see a black person or a brown person, and they will comment on their skin color. And I've actually seen this happen in supermarkets. And when the child says, like, look at that dark person, or they're dirty, or they're chocolate, whatever, the parent will shush them and be like, shh, shh. So the child realizes that I'm not supposed to talk about race. Where parents of color, because that could happen the same thing. You live in an all black environment, you see someone who's white. I've actually heard Black and Latinx parents talking about what, like, this is what melanin is, and kind of explaining this, what it is, and not shushing. And I get why people do it, because it's like you don't want someone to think that your child is racist and things like that. So, but there are some really good resources for people. Like, how do you talk about that? And how do you make that conversation be more natural around skin complexion? What? Yes, Erica? I saw
I
you.
can tell you my group, I think that I'm the one talking all the time. So I'm going to let my group raise their hand if they...
Yeah, I can talk about
All right, Hannah.
one of the main points we thought about at the end, after we all had kind of gone around on a few of the points. Erica pointed out that we were kind of circling around the ideas of how perceived liberal spaces, racism can be so much more insidious and not talked about and not brought up. I mean, it kind of connects to what Rebecca was saying earlier about in North County, we might not think of racism as being as blatant. And that's part of why it's maybe not discussed as often. And like from where we grew up, but also in arts organizations too, we think of these spaces as like bastions of liberal thought or of expansive ideas and new ideas. And I think racism is not discussed in part because we think of ourselves as being so liberal. in our institutions as well, and haven't dug in there. I think that was one of our main points that we talked about, as well as community, but I forget exactly how Erica so well summed it up at the end.
That was perfect, Hannah. I think that definitely summed it up. I think we had talked about community, and that we, in terms of how we saw, and I think Christopher and Teal had attributed, this kind of the collegiate community, it brings in a lot of folks of color, and they're not considered permanent. So in that, it's almost as though we don't necessarily need to address it. They're not here for long. They're not really part of the community, but there are folks who would like to be part of the community. So there's I think a little bit of, right. I think Hannah put it perfectly.
Right. Well, and they're here for 4 years. Like, they're here for a significant time.
Right.
Certainly at MCLA, we have a number of students who are of color, and actually LGBT students too, who feel very uncomfortable in the community. And we'll talk about that. I put in a great piece that a friend of mine shared with me from a couple of years ago. It's called The Culture of the Smug White Liberal. It may make some of you very uncomfortable. I got it when I worked at McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota. And if anyone knows McAllister, it was like perfect. I was like, this is my experience, where everyone's like, oh, I get it. And they don't realize when they're doing racist things like right to your face, but they've convinced themselves that they are smug white liberals. So I think that, and so often with white folks, I also say that racism is equated with poor white people. Like, oh, those people. So it's the people who live in Florida. They are the problems. And it's like, no. Another thing that I think is important that I always want to remind people with whiteness is, when we talk about white spaces, that was designed on purpose. Like, white spaces exist on purpose. Whiteness was created as a benefit, as something as literally citizenship, 1790, free white people, the only people allowed here. And literally citizenship was equated with whiteness. So if there are some wonderful books out there called The Color of Law, about, is it The Color of Law? But there's one about how like redlining and things like that were done. I know that in Williamstown, there's really a push to look at some of the restrictive covenants that they had in their houses. And actually, I believe that in some of there's still language in some of the like deeds of the houses that they just forgot to take away. So I do think that, and also let's remember Williams College was founded with the money on the sale of enslaved person. So we had, and here in North Adams, we were a textile place. Where did they get the cotton from? So we were all implicated in this. We're all implicated in all of this. So it's just it's easy just to say, oh, I'm not impacted by it. But yeah, I really do think that looking at this stuff is very difficult. It's very difficult, especially for some of you who may come from families that may have owned other human beings or, had servants of another, and all of that stuff. But that's where I think, as Erica talked about, the self-awareness is important, because it's like, what is your stuff? Where are those places where we feel guilty? Where are the places, and how do we move past that? Because I will tell you, white guilt does absolutely nothing except center white people again. I mean, really, it centers white people again. Because then I can't tell you literally how many times I'll be in my office and someone comes in and they're feeling guilty and blah, blah, and they want to be anti-racist and they're guilty. And I leave and I'm like, we talked for an hour and they only talked about themselves. Okay. So it's why we have to do the work. other folks who, any other group who hasn't gone?
Oh, good. Do we want to, so we're hitting that 6:30 mark. And as I said, if you need to go, we completely understand. I know that Christopher is going to go around to see, I think you called it the
one word checkout. So
the one word checkout.
You can actually say it, or if you want to type it in, that's true, because it will be kind of awkward being like, we can popcorn, that will take a while. But, or if people want to write in, it's kind of like, what's one word as you're leaving this space? What's one word to describe how you're feeling? And if you have to cheat and do like dashes, because I always do that, I can never just do one word, so I do dashes. Appreciative. So I will read them out loud so that we can hear. Appreciative. Action, yes. Humbled. Next, yes. Educate. Enlightened. Grateful. Learning. Determined, clearer. Chris, inquisitive, leadership. Community. Energized. I would say that's how I feel too, energized. Grounded and determined. Ready.
These are good.
Vulnerable.
We're ready for action.
Cautiously optimistic. I am also going to put in my email address in case any of you want to talk further about this or have suggestions or just kind of want to pick my brain or just want to say, I'm scared shitless right now. It's okay to be scared shitless. Like, you know, I'm going, so I did want to tell you, sorry about action. On Sunday, there will be a Black Lives Matter protest at 1 p.m. I don't know exactly where, but I'll be honest, I'm scared about that. I will be there, but I know I'm going to be scared because I also know that there will be people who will be counter-protesting. I also know that the person who said what he said comes from a very powerful family in North Adams. So there will be pushback. Oh, thank you, Amanda, about the link.
Oh yeah, great.
And
I
Erica,
want to, yeah.
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, Erica, you had mentioned that there would be some likely follow-up from this. Do you want to, if we're about to lose some more people, and do you want to sort of repeat sort of what you see as some of the follow-up from
so
this?
Absolutely. Thanks, Blair. One of the things that we were all very clear about was we wanted to create a way in which we could sustain this conversation and all of the different feelings that it seems as though we're sharing and how we actually act on that. So 2 things specifically. We will continue these facilitated discussions with diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals like Christopher. And our goal is to do it at least once a month. So that is one thing that we'll do. And obviously we'll specifically invite the folks that registered for this to attend. And the other is we will continue to have conversations with artists and those within the art field using art as a vehicle for discussion. So I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to join us for a discussion about the work by Titus Kaffar that was on the cover of Time magazine in June, but it served as a wonderful vehicle for us to talk about some very difficult aspects of race through the work. And that's what we do at BCRC, because we're rooted in the arts, but we feel that these actually do go hand in hand, and that we will create that sort of intersection between the two. But what's most important to us is that we continue this conversation. So those two things we can guarantee you happening at least once a month. I think that we also want to create, when we have these sessions, opportunities for us to create community and build a network. All of you have shared your emails with us. I hope you have all acknowledged that this is going to be recorded so that we can share it online with other folks that didn't have a chance to participate, but also those that desire to see what sort of conversations are taking place, and as we take action, that we model the sort of possibilities and action that we can take. So beyond that, I think it's time for us to do the further work to brainstorm about what this looks like, not just at MCLA through BCRC, but all of our other rich community organizations rooted in the arts here in our area. To go back to an old saying, we can, look locally so we can work globally, have that spread, but let's create a proof of concept. Let's create a way in which we can actually model for others what can be done. But we have to sustain the conversation and we have to be vigilant, and we have to be here to keep each other accountable as well as supported.
Right.
So those are our two main action items. The same way that Christopher invited you to contact him, we invite you to contact us and let us know if you have suggestions. We always want to collaborate. Lots of folks on here know that I'm really big on setting up standing meetings with folks to bring people together at different art institutions. So that is one thing that we do, but there's never enough, and we can't do too much, honestly. So beyond that, that's what we're going to do. We will actually be sharing information that Christopher has shared with our group in preparation for this through different documents about understanding white supremacy, and we will share that with the group so that you have references, and we'll keep our own kind of online resource library for you to access those on our website as well, and we will let you know when that's up and available. So those are the actions that we're taking. Know that Artist Impact Coalition, of which BCRC is a part, is continuing this work. This is what we do. We are institutionalizing this work toward change and the sort of culture of anti-racism that we desire. Those are our two action items. And I want to add one more thing, because I like to talk, is that I really appreciate people sharing and making themselves vulnerable. And one of the things that this group, which I really would like to get feedback from folks too about how this was for you. Feel free to email the address that you registered through for Gallery 51, or you can email me directly. But it's really important that we understand that this work, especially work of white folks, is not about guilting people. Racism, it's misunderstood that racists are bad people and anyone else, everybody's involved, and it's not about good and bad. It's about doing what is morally right and understanding the inequity and injustice that exists.
Yes.
That's all that it is. Racism is just a title. It's not about good and bad, and we need to separate ourselves from this group of people that think that there is such thing as racism, and some, I've got white friends or I've got black friends and it's not me. Don't individualize it. Everybody is part of this, but this is not about being good or bad. Us being here, we're doing the work. And so if anybody felt that they were made to feel guilty, uncomfortable in that way, please let us know, because that's not the intention. The intention is to empower you and to encourage you and give you the confidence to move forward with it and be able to sustain the work. Because 6 months from now, we may not all feel as energized as we are in this moment. And let us not have to look at a video of someone being brutally murdered to spark and wake us up again. We know that's not necessary. So that's what we're trying to achieve.
Right. Erica, I was just going to say, so my background is I'm a sociologist. So one of the things that I might be able to do, and so I could talk about, like, you know, whiteness and racism as a system, because for me, it helps us understand it's not about good and bad. It's about that we were all born into this system that we had no control over. It's what we do now. And how do we interrupt that system? So that is, I could certainly do that to kind of help people how to understand, think about racism and white supremacy systemically. Because for me, that's when it makes it's a little bit more distant. And it's like, oh, it's not about me as a good person, being a good person. It's about, we're all, like you said, we are all implicated in the system.
Well, I know that we have passed our time. I definitely invite, if anyone would either like to share verbally or in chat, any last comments or questions. While people are thinking, I personally want to thank all the members of the Artist Impact Coalition.
Yes.
Who participated and supported us and made this possible, and just with us. That in and of itself is amazing, and I thank you. And of course, I thank Christopher McDonald.
Oh, thank you.
For all of your work and sharing your experience and expertise with us. We definitely appreciate it. And obviously, this won't be our last conversation.
No.
And I most importantly want to thank all of you that attended today's discussion, but most importantly, I hope to see you at the next one. It's even more important than this one.
Yes.
It's more important for you to go to the next one.
Right,
and so on.
right. Yes.
Let's see, anything in the chat?
Molly's action, she's going to contact the North Adams City Councils. I think that.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's going to be important. Thank you, everyone. This was wonderful.
So this will be up on our website. We'll be sending out follow-up emails to all of you. And once it is up and live on the MCLA YouTube channel, we will share it with you so you can share it with other folks and relive the moment.
Right?
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
I'll talk to a lot of you soon, I'm sure. Well, be safe.